Hello, everybody, and welcome to this JiraCon 2022 session on how DevOps practices can unleash the potential of highly regulated teams. My name is Saskia Listler, and I have the honor to moderate this session to you and guide you through it together with Rina Nir, who will tell you a bit more about the topic in a few seconds. She's the CEO of RadBee, and she will tell you some interesting things about how you can use DevOps if you're working in a highly regulated environment. A few housekeeping information before we start off. Just to give you an idea, the talk will be about 30 minutes and we have time for Q&A at the end. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat while Rina is talking. Depending on where it fits, I will either put them in right away and ask her right in the moment. Otherwise, we'll definitely get back to your questions at the end of it. And I'll also give you a heads up at the end of the talk. Rina will share a link with you where you can have access to the presentation that she's going to show you. So if you miss something, nothing is lost on you. And you can also book an appointment with her if you have further questions. So having said that, I'm going to hand it off to Rina, and the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Saskia, and all of you who attend this session. In my daily work, I work with people in the pharmaceutical and medical technology industry. So these teams are working in a very highly regulated environment. Each product, when it's released to the market, has to be accompanied with a very big pile of documents. But they still want to adopt all these modern technologies, from Agile to DevOps to what have you, be automatic, less manual, and deliver really, really quick. But they have a real challenge because they need also to produce all these documentation. What I'm going to share with you today comes from my years of trying to help these teams move faster, join everybody else in the 21st century, and basically be able to deliver business value really, really quickly without a lot of waste. And one way to help teams think about their situation and what they actually need to achieve in order to be able to move quickly and deliver faster is that they need to understand, as teams in a regulated environment, that it's not enough to be mature from DevOps practices point of view. They also need to have very mature documentation practices. And this kind of way of thinking about these two axes is very useful. And I call it the D-square maturity model. Yes, each team can have a look at themselves. And I encourage you, if you are working in a regulated industry in pharma or medical technology or automotive or what have you, how are your DevOps practices and how are your documentation practices? And well, we have seen all teams that are located in different places in this square. Yes, some of them are very mature in terms of the documentation. And quite funnily, in recent years, we have seen teams that are very mature in their DevOps practices. They have the wings that DevOps gives, but if they don't mature their documentation practices, and given the specific industry that they are operating in, their DevOps wings alone don't get them very far. What teams actually need, they need to have this very almost magical capability of combining both very strong DevOps practices and documentation practices. This actually allows them to grow the size of wings that can carry the body that they need to have in terms of their regulatory compliance and requirements from the market. So that's a small invitation for you, each one in their own team, in their own context, have a little bit of consideration of this model. Where is your team today? And I'll try to share some tips on how you can actually move closer to this square. And if you are already very happy in this square, how you can even advance further in your progress and speed. So how do teams actually achieve this D-squared transformation, where they grow the necessary muscles and wings to carry them in this specific environment that they operate in? Like a lot of things in life, there is actually 3 secret or not so secret ingredients. The first one is leadership, and what is really important here in terms of leadership is leadership that comes from the very top. Someone has to have the vision that, yes, we don't need to do things as we have done them always. We can actually deliver very quick versions. And this is actually a very change in mindset to a lot of CEOs in this industry, because they are all very used to deliver slow. So just having the courage to believe that we can actually deliver new releases very frequently is almost a leap of faith. And the second type of leadership that is needed is leadership from the regulatory and compliance teams in these organizations. So probably sitting now here are not QARA people. So catch them, bring them on board. They have to be leaders in this process. The second theme is teams, and DevOps, of course, is a very big philosophy around the fact that development teams need to be collaborating with ops, and therefore we need maybe to have a very big DevOps team. So if you are in a regulated industry, developers and operations are not enough. You need to absolutely bring product managers in, and you need to bring the quality assurance and regulatory team in, and they all need to collaborate together in order to achieve this transformation. If you have leadership in place and you are bringing all your teams along, you can then go ahead and use the automation. And that's, of course, a very DevOpsy type of thing. A lot of tools, integration. We don't do anything manual. We want to do as much automation. And that really can boost the whole initiative and bring it to the next level. Now, let's assume that you start with leadership, because that's the very basic ingredient. What are the steps to build a good transformational plan? So I built for you a 6-step process, which is actually 4 steps, and then the last 2 steps are the classical DevOps steps of actually use what you have created and iterate. So if we really focus on the first 4, you start by listing the needs, and the needs here are the needs of the regulatory authorities. So for the sake of this presentation, I'm ignoring the list of the product from the user's point of view. I'm focusing on what the regulatory authority needs. And someone needs to be very precise on listing what it is that you need to submit at the end of your development or with each release cycle, so that you are sure that these needs are met at the same time that the product is ready. Once you have identified your needs, you need to identify your documentation pipelines. I'll go into it in a minute and I'll explain exactly what they are. And then you need to map to roles, because one of the things that will really accelerate your ability to deliver on quicker releases is that the burden of documentation is not concentrated at the very end, or is not concentrated with one role, but actually is spread, so that when a certain piece of information that is important from regulatory perspective is created, this piece of documentation is added in to the mix, and we can then use it at the time of release. only when you have mapped your documentation pipeline to roles, you are ready to actually configure the tooling. Because what we want to achieve is configure the tools that your team anyway uses. So, for example, if your development team is using Bitbucket pipelines, then we want to use Bitbucket pipelines for that as well. Once you configure the tooling, use, iterate, improve, and you'll over time get there. So what are documentation pipelines? We start defining the pipeline at the very end. What do we need to have if we want to release our product to the market? What do we need to have from regulatory perspective? We list all the territories, all the type of authorities, all the type of submissions that we need to have. And we then find the list of documentation that has to be ready at the end of the release. So basically the pipeline started with the submission, going back to the individual documents, and then it goes back into what I call documentation snippets. So for example, if you need to have user specification or user needs as one of your documentation, a snippet would be a single user requirement. And each single user requirement can be created at a certain time during your development effort. It certainly is not created at the very end of the release. And the point of drawing those pipelines is actually going backward and finding the source or the moment of time where each snippet of documentation is being created. I drew here a pipeline that is 3 steps long, but some pipelines may be much longer than 3 steps. Yes, it's just an example. Typically, they don't get shorter than 3 steps. And once you identify the pipeline, you basically can identify who are the responsible people at each stage and bring them in, let them know, train them, give them the tools and the support that they need in order to actually create their small contribution at the moment that they actually create the knowledge that can be recorded as a documentation snippet. So that is typically where product managers need to be brought in, developers, testers, and so on. Let's dive and look closely at one documentation pipeline example. And to make this juicy, I selected one of the most complex documentation that is very often required from regulatory point of view. Very often, meaning I don't know of any regulatory submission that does not need to include a traceability matrix. If you are new to this, I'll just quickly explain what a traceability matrix is. It's basically your specification for the product, organized in a hierarchical view that allows you to demonstrate that whatever your product owner specified needs to be in the product was actually tested and has been established to be working before you have released the product. And in this case, I show here a snippet from a traceability matrix that is 3 levels. The first level is the user needs. It's a list of the very high level requirement. The second level is design inputs. Sometimes they are called functional specifications. These functional specifications are an elaboration, a detail of the user need. And the third level in this traceability matrix are the actual tests, where each of the design input has been tested, and we have even the test results. Now, I'm not kidding you, some traceability matrix can be 5, 6, 7 level deeps. They get very complex. Try to do them at the end of the development effort, you'll get a nightmare. So many sweat tears and time has passed or are passing even today for teams who are trying to build them with Excel or with other ways that are not optimal. Let's see what the documentation pipeline looks like for building a traceability matrix in a more modern way. So we start as usual from the submission. So that's the right side. In order to include trace matrix in each of our submission, we need to have this document ready at the end of the release and approved. So that's a condition from regulatory authorities. There should be someone who has reviewed the traceability matrix and approved it. To get this approved, we then need to go backward and realize that we need to be able to create a draft of the traceability matrix. Now, to create a draft of the traceability matrix alongside with the release of the product, we don't want someone to spend huge amount of time creating that. We want it to be an automatic process of basically aggregating all the bits of data that goes into the traceability. The bits of data that goes into the traceability are things like our user requirements, functional specifications, manual tests, the test results, automatic test, and the automatic test results. We map them into tools, and the tools we are using here are Confluence for the front side of the pipeline. So at the moment that there is a document that is created, even if it's in draft, this is created in Confluence. But our documentation snippets, the user requirements, functional specifications, and so on, are managed as issues in Jira software. And we basically configure Jira software to be able to hold all these type of snippets and also hold the relationship between them. So we use Jira links to link between them. The automatic test runs are actually run as part of our CI pipeline. So we have a continuous integration pipeline that runs on Bitbucket. And this pipeline, when it runs the automatic test at the very end, it imports the data into Jira software. So we basically have all our traceability live all the time in Jira. So we'll have along this pipeline, I've prepared for us 3 demos. So the first one is the demo of importing the test results, the automatic test results into Jira.
Our team uses Bitbucket pipelines for its continuous integration flow. Our pipeline builds the software and runs the automatic tests. As the last step, it closes the loop and imports the test results into Jira. Each automatic test is associated with a single test issue in Jira. This test case has been already executed several times in the past. The results are here. Note that it's not required to import each single execution. Our CI pipeline is selective, and we can choose when to import results to Jira and when not. For example, we may import only tests executed on the main branch. Navigating to Bitbucket, when new code is pushed to our main branch, the pipeline triggers. It builds the software, then runs the test, and finally pushes the results into Jira. Navigating back to Jira. We see here the new execution result from this pipeline. This new result can impact the upstream traceability because it's now part of the bigger picture. No more buried in the pipeline, but a data item that is connected with all the rest of the puzzle.
So that was the very first peripheral step of the pipeline, importing automatic tests into Jira. The test management tool that we have used there, or I have used in this demo, is X-Ray Test Management for Jira. It's an app available on the marketplace, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. Once we have all these bits and pieces of information in our Jira, we need somehow to aggregate it into Confluence and ideally be able to do it in one click. To bridge this type of integration, we are using Jira Snapshots for Confluence. Jira Snapshots for Confluence is an app that RadBee has developed and put on the marketplace. And its purpose is basically to be used as a connector from Jira and Confluence in context of those type of data pipelines. So let's have a look on how this is basically done.
Here is the draft traceability report in Confluence. The page structure is ready from very early in the project. We have defined exactly what needs to go into it, and it's all predefined in advance. It captures the data items that we need for the traceability report. User needs, tracing down into functional specification, linking to tests and test results. I am prompted when all testing activities, manual and automatic, are completed. At this point, I capture the data one more time by taking a new snapshot. The capture takes a single click. The snapshot in Confluence is fixed and will not change, no matter what happens in Jira. I do a final review of the traceability. I can even do a final diff check. This is a sanity check to see the most recent changes are there. Now that the traceability is ready and captured in Confluence, the only thing remaining is to get it approved and electronically signed. This all happens inside Confluence.
So the idea here basically is that from the moment that your product is ready for release, that basically means that it has been built by the pipeline. You have executed automatic tests. They were imported automatically to Jira. It is only a matter of a few minutes for someone to be able to prepare the traceability matrix for the final approval. And assuming the approval happens in Confluence, you get the approved document almost at the same time that you have your ready product. And this is the magic. That's where the magic happens, where teams are able to deliver as quickly as they are able to develop their products. And within the regulated industry, this is absolutely magic. It's shortening dramatically the time to market for new releases. Regarding the demo itself, the approval step has been demonstrated with workflows for Confluence, an application by AppFox. Okay, now we have the approved traceability matrix. We need to be ready to do the submission, and in an ideal world, we want to have it to do that at the same time. So as soon as the traceability matrix is approved, we want to be able to do the submission. Let's see how we can achieve that. And the app that we are using here inside Confluence is Scroll Documents.
In Confluence, we use a dedicated space to organize all our technical files and regulatory dossiers. For example, we have created a dossier for our European technical file. We organize the dossier as a document in Confluence. A document is a collection of Confluence pages. We organize each regulatory document to fit exactly the requirements from the authorities. Most of the pages in the document are linking to our official documentation. In this way, the document is a logical organization and reuse of pages we already have. Pages from the official docs are linked into this technical files space. For example, the development plan is the same for all territories. So we have a single document that is then reused for all submissions. The technical file is a living dossier, always reflecting the newest pages we have. We also have the option to capture static version of the dossier at specific points of time. For example, when we do a regulatory submission and send it out to the authorities. One of the nicest features of this setup is that we can, in one operation, export each regulatory submission as a single PDF file, ready for sending.
So here you have it. There is a plan to actually achieve similar setup in your environment. The plan starts with a list from the authorities and progresses as I described here. Surely, in our demonstration, I've used specific tools. Other tools could be used, but the concept is pretty much the same. You need to, from the needs, define your documentation pipelines and progress from there. That's really key. And that leaves you with basically two options. One, you can continue trying to struggle with the way that things are today and be complacent with the fact that in our industry, releases need to be slow and heavy and no one can move fast. So that's basically the drifting option. And that's what still a lot of people in the industry are doing. But I can promise you some people are taking action and they are adopting the new modern tool, the new ways of doing things, and they are doing it in a very skillful way that will eventually bring them to this amazing state where a regulatory medical device, for example, can be released very, very frequently. And believe me, I've seen this happening. I think I finished the presentation part. I'd be very happy to answer some questions now.
Thank you very much, Rina, for guiding us through the whole process. I personally find it fascinating every time to see how easy it sometimes can go when you have the right setup, when we all think it has to go. It's just the way it is, slowly and moving bit by bit. When in fact, a lot of the times we can just take away a lot of the hustle if we think through the process. So thank you very much for guiding us through that. And I actually have some questions taken from the chat. Maybe first a more general question, because Jira and Confluence are not computer validated software. In the medical industry, especially with that regulation, a lot of the times that is an issue. But your preferred way is still to go with Jira and Confluence. Why
Yes.
that? How is that overcome?
So indeed, Jira and Confluence do not come from the manufacturer as a validated system, but you can validate them yourself. And if you are, let's say, doing it in a skillful way, then the effort of validation is very reasonable. And I can promise you that we have never seen or gone into a validation project that is a horrendous 6 months effort by many people, like sometimes in pharma you can see. So the validation effort is very reasonable. And the gain that you get from using these particular systems is that it's the systems that your team would love to use. And I think that one of the shifts that need to happen in quality assurance and compliance teams is that these compliance people cannot expect everybody else in the organization to come and work in the tools that compliance people like. Actually, compliance needs to come to the people. And if most of the team is using Jira and Confluence, you as a compliance person are better to make the effort and make it work for the team, because then you will see suddenly how you can stop chasing people around with those compliance tasks.
Right. Okay. Interesting. So you were very clear about the fact that you would always go to host the documentation in Confluence and feed it with the tickets and the snippets that you have in Jira. Can you get a bit into why that is your preferred option regarding access control, sharing, and also online review and editing?
Yes. So I see this question from Piero. Piero, thank you for the question. So Confluence, in some organizations, and this is really where it shines, is the platform of choice for sharing knowledge within an organization. And in my worldview, the technical file dossiers, the regulatory submissions are part of the knowledge of the organization, and it has a lot of advantages if we use Confluence for that, because suddenly these dossiers are accessible to anybody who needs it. And Confluence does have enough access control in place, and this is in both cases, of course, data center, but also in cloud. In both cases, enough access control for the day-to-day usage of the regulatory files. Now, some organizations, and I say that it can be totally justified, once they have the regulatory file ready, they download it as a PDF and they safeguard it in somewhere else. And this somewhere else typically is a very closed vault, like an Amazon online bucket or another storage where it really is saved for many years to come. And I can totally understand that. So I think that if you build your whole regulatory system on Confluence, once you have these files ready and you want to keep them in the same way that in old times we would keep them in binders, you can just have even an automatic process that would export them in PDF. And by the way, Scroll PDF now does support API. So you can have this whole process totally automatic and keep it in a vault aside, and it's totally safe from a record keeping point of view.
There is a follow-up question on that from Hero. He says, I saw there's limitation, meaning only share the specific page to somebody outside the organization. Can you say something about that?
Yes, I'm trying to understand the question. I saw there is limitation saying only share the specific page to some. So I am guessing that what you need is to share a specific page with people outside of your organization. Is this what you need and you are asking how to do that? Yes, okay, just wanted to be sure. So first of all, you can share much more than one page with someone outside the organization. The sticky bit there is that anybody with whom you are sharing spaces, for example, or collection of pages, need to have a Confluence license. So there is a fee or a cost to do that, in the sense that they need to have a license. Once they have a license, they can access any part. Now, I know that Atlassian at the moment are rolling out these guest access, but in the current implementation, even these guest accesses will need a license to Confluence. So that is basically a commercial consideration, but not a technical one. I hope this answers the question.
For me personally, a question came up during what you said. So what came up for me was, you mentioned in your D3 triangle very much at the beginning, yes, that leadership is basically the basic ingredient to the whole setup that you're doing right now. So how would you say, first of all, Jira and Confluence, the whole system that you build up, including the snapshots add-in, and as well the change towards a DevOps mindset, can support leadership in reaching the company goals?
Yes, so thanks for the question. I think that because Jira and Confluence are not only perceived, but really are a very modern tool set, and by modern I mean there's an open API, it can be integrated, and there can be a whole ecosystem built around it. And when I talk about ecosystem, I don't speak only about the continuous integration pipeline that can feed into Jira, for example. I can say about other systems that might be in your organization, like Monday.com or other tools that your team uses. They all can be connected into this central hub, if you want. And this, in terms of leadership, is really powerful, because you are meeting all your teams where they are. So you don't force everybody to work in a specific tool. You try to come and make it very easy for people to participate in this larger effort. Now, in regards to the question about how hard it is for teams to switch to DevOps mindset, it's a cultural shift for sure. So, and leadership there, the role of leadership is to believe that a change is possible and to give the business incentive. So leaders need to say, we want to be able to release our product not once a year or twice a year, because in the pharmaceutical industry, it's still very common to see release cycles of a year. Yes. And the leader needs to say, no, that does not work anymore. We need to be able to deliver a new version once a quarter. And for some organizations, moving from once a year to once a quarter is a very, very big step. But once they do it once a quarter, they can be more ambitious and say, no, no, we want to release it every month. So it does not happen in one go, because as I saw, and I did choose this analogy of a horse with wings, because it gives you the feeling that there's actually a lot of muscle and skill that is involved in growing these type of organizations. And that just takes time. Yes, you don't achieve this in one day. It takes time, but then it takes the sense of direction from the leadership to say, we want to be that organization. And we have to be that type of organization because our peers are doing it. If we will not move, we will be dead. And that's really the crux of the matter. I hope.
Right. It is a marathon, not a sprint. To gain the muscles, you need to do the ongoing exercise and not just a one-off running 100 meters. Which brings me to another topic, because Jira and Confluence also is used a lot in the Scrum and Agile world, Scrum and Agile software development. And you've talked a lot about user needs now, but especially in the Agile world, we talk a lot about epics or user stories or all of those terms. How would you adjust the system that you just presented us for those types of working style?
Yes, so this is the type of question I hear quite a lot from people who really work in the Agile scheme, Scrum Masters and so on, and they like to work with epics and stories. You can, of course, so technically in the data pipeline documentation pipeline I've shared, you could do exactly the same thing if you would work. For example, you would say that your epics are user needs and your stories are functional specifications. From technical standpoint, that would totally work. But what I see over time that companies who start in this approach later on switch and they introduce back the user needs. And the reason for that is that stories are very temporary. They are scoped to be optimized for the needs of the development team, not for the needs of documentation. And if we want to keep the documentation running so smoothly and quickly, we want to be separating these two, have one item, which is the story that really serves the needs of the developers, and another one, which is the functional specification and user need, that serves the need of the product management team and the documentation.
Okay. You just went back into the technical specifics of what you just showed us. Can you go back to what apps you use to managing those specification items?
Yes, so within Jira, this setup of requirements, user needs, and design inputs and so on, you don't need an app for that. You can, it's a matter of configuring. So if you're not aware, in Jira software, you can have your custom issue types, and that's basically what we do. And we use the link, and again, from link type point of view, you can define whatever link types you want. So you can call them trace down to, trace up to, tested by, tests, and so on. So you can build the whole semantic of your traceability matrix in Jira out of the box. the only area there that requires an app, I didn't cover it here, but if you want to do risk management in Jira, which I strongly recommend as well, for that, you would need to get an app, and the app that we typically use is Risk Register for Jira from Project Bound.
Okay, so we're reaching the end of our time, so I have one last question for you. To everybody who's watched this session now today, if they only take away one thing, what would you say that should be?
Ah, wow. Audience participation, that's great. Thank you, Saskia, for that. I really am curious to see what people will put here. Don't be shy.
What would you say in the meantime while we wait for answers? What would your answer be to that? What would be your...
So my main thing doing this whole thing here is that the tooling is there, the technology is there. In terms of DevOps, we have really got a lot of technical solutions to really remove all the manual work. Now, it's really for the people to focus on the smart things, on the things that they bring to the product, and be able to document them and so on. So really, the tools can achieve it. The bottleneck now, where I see in teams, is really the culture, the education, the skill level, and human beings are much slower to adopt than machines. Maybe I can say it like that.
We have two very good answers to that in the chat, which also sum that up very much. DevOps, first of all, is evolving, and second of all is the future. And I think that's a wonderful thing to stop the session with. Thank you, Rina, for guiding us through all of this, guiding us through the process, showing up where there's probably potential for involvement in all of us and in all our organizations, and where we can tweak a little bit more and make our process more more quick, more reliable, more resilient, all of those things. Thank you for listening into this, and you can still see the link on there. Feel free to reach out to Rina, ask her out for a coffee, or download the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Saskia. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy. I'll share the last presentation, the last slide, where you can see the upcoming presentation. And I'll be joining now that I'm relaxed, and over my presentation, I can see what others are doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.